You are listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals grounded in philosophical truth, and that truth is discovered through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we have a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook readings of stories that have appeared in our magazine. And our companion podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories as a way to model the kinds of discussions we hope you're having about these readings with friends, family, or students. I am Colby, your narrator, and the creator of After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Friend suggestions are by far the way we get the majority of our listener growth. Okay, so now let's talk about the story that we're looking at today. It is titled Believing in Ghosts, and it is by André Lopes. Sit back, enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The politician stood on the podium and addressed the nation. Dressed in a dark suit and red tie, he answered all the questions the reporter asked him. The people are tired of the same old faces in charge of policy that has been a disaster, particularly among the young, said the politician. And how are you planning to overturn the course of this nation, Mr. Booker? Asked the reporter. We need to take a look at our healthcare options. Currently, the system is a disaster. Our young workers are underpaid and overworked, and our elderly, after a whole life of working for this nation, are left abandoned in poverty, said Booker. Booker was an experienced politician who came from a long line of famous lawmakers and economists. His immaculate presentation, charisma, and natural knack for leadership were certainly 3 of the main reasons why he was the frontrunner on the polls nationwide. A campaign employee approached him as he left the conference room. We just got confirmation of another ghost, informed Booker's prime assistant. Who? Replied Booker. Jared Benjamin? Booker paused for a second. The one that spread those fake sex tapes a few months ago? Yes, that one. Our intel team just confirmed that he's a composite. Any word on who's the puppet master? No clue yet. The platform he was using for his web series is very proud of their privacy policy. Booker checked if he was already away from the cameras. No one is liable for defamation in this country anymore? Fucking bullshit, Booker said. We'll continue to pressure for them to identify the ghost. Chapter 2. Rain rolled on her bed and stared at her mobile phone screen. Most of her social media feed was auto-generated clickbait articles written by AI. She received job offers on a professional social network sent by non-existent human resources employees. The effortless creation of content made its supply near endless. This was fine. No moral panic concerning technology has ever produced anything of note. She scrolled through social media and saw an ad for Quick Medicine. The man promoting it, bald, with a shirt and green tie, talks about all the benefits of this all-natural drug has. He may be an actual person passionate about bullshit medicine, or a complete fabrication, or something in between. Rain felt lazy today, but she made an effort to be productive. Mr. Booker had emailed her a new scope for security auditing. She did most of her work remotely, and this gig at candidate Booker's campaign wasn't her only show. Despite that, she had no schedules, which meant that most days were a foggy mess of sleep. In the winter, she regularly woke up to almost dark outside, and her diet was mediocre at best. Grocery shopping, she felt like an astronaut stepping on a foreign planet. Not again, she thought. The clock on her phone marked 1 p.m. I swore I'd wake up at decent hours. While heavy work late at night was more productive to her, the almost flipped schedules compared to a regular person intensified the feeling of alienation to regular people. Now, with the dramatic failure of an early get-up plan, the routine was the usual. Get out of bed, make something to eat, and sit in front of the computer, scroll through the work email, and, of course, procrastinate on social media. After a while, she fired up the virtual machine used to work. As a cybersecurity consultant, or better known in popular culture, a hacker, her job was to find security vulnerabilities of her clients. Hacking is not the same as breaking things. Well, not necessarily. Hacking is the art of exposing a piece of tech's features and try to make it perform amusing things. Amusing to the hacker, at least. This philosophy allows a competent hacker to explore the infrastructure of a client in a way a regular user might not, but a malicious user might. If, filling up an online form, it is prompted to insert your age, what you put in, something between 0 and 120, any sane person would guess. The hacker might input -2 or 99999999 or a piece of code. In this online form, when presented with these strange inputs, exhibits a weird, unexpected behavior. Congratulations, you've hacked it. Now, time for exploitation. How can you manipulate this weird behavior in your favor? If you're lucky, you might gain access to a database. If you're not so lucky, then nothing interesting would happen beyond that. This process of trying all these different things to trigger unexpected, potentially dangerous behavior is what Rain would call, perhaps in poor taste, weaponized obsessive-compulsive disorder. She opened the website of her favorite news outlet. The headline caught her attention. The phantom vlogger, Jared Benjamin, is the latest confirmed ghost in the political commentator sphere. So, JB's a ghost. Jared Benjamin was a treasured vlogger and internet political commentator, so him being a ghost shocked somewhat, but it didn't surprise a whole lot of people. A ghost was the common term used to describe a fabricated person, from looks to voice and personality, all made up using clever algorithms. Rain had entertained the thought Booker was himself a ghost prior to meeting the man in person, not only because the use of ghosts in mainstream life has become an entire generation completely apathetic and weary of media in general, but also because the man had this aura of an almost perfect leader, an effective populist which still managed to keep bridges between political enemies. As a general trusted freelancer, and since she was already Booker's security consultant on the campaign, Rain earned an additional client for security auditing, the candidate's main business, a well-known supermarket chain. After checking the provided test scope, she smiled. This was huge. There were at least 3 full web applications that contain online shopping and an online contest. All of this provides entertainment for days or weeks. This is unexpected. Rain found an SSH server with a trivial password. Booker. Really? That was usually where the fun ended. As a white hat, you're supposed to write a report on how you got in, how shit the security is, and the best way to improve it. But what if there's something here that would allow me to obtain access to a parallel system, she thought, as she tried to convince herself into investigating this server, knowing full well that this was out of her regular procedure. Digging into personnel files is not the job of a white hat. There were 4 projects stored in this machine, some very early versions of a future redesigned website for online shopping, a new experimental service for regular clients, and another project, the most interesting. It didn't appear to have anything functional, but upon inspection, the code inside was littered with advanced math and statistics. Rain didn't reach any conclusion regarding that code. Maybe I should call it a day. The clock turned 6 a.m. Chapter 3. Rain woke up with a phone call. She searched the phone around the pillow, still half asleep, and opened her eyes just enough to read the name on the screen. Booker, Project Manager. Why is he calling at the crack of... She checked the clock. Noon. She picked up the call. We need you here right now. We've been attacked. Attacked how? Our boys in the Security Operations Center caught a huge data exfiltration from within our network. some kind of malware snuck in and the attackers were trying to steal as much info as possible. And I'm absolutely needed there. What the fuck is wrong with you? Isn't it obvious how serious this is? His yelling and panicked voice suggested something in the scale of an H-bomb blowing up all of the downtown. Sure, I'll be there ASAP. Booker's PM was what she thought the result of a secret CIA PSYOP program to create the most insufferable prick on Earth. He had an obvious disdain for her, not only because he saw her as a mercenary criminal wannabe, but also because she lived beyond the usual rules of the corporation. Despite being, by all accounts, a recent employee, she was not an intern bringing him coffee and cookies, but instead a living exception to corp with a very substantial monthly compensation. Her look was the typical of these days: messy, short black hair, clothing on its second day of use, t-shirt and jeans laid on one side of the closet, and business-friendly clothing on the other. She sighed and grabbed a formal shirt and a pair of business-friendly trousers. She hated formal clothing, but Rain had spent way too much time arguing about dress codes. There were dishes from the day before and the day before on the desk where the computer was, clothing scattered all throughout the floor, an empty bottle of wine on a corner of her room, sat there since last May. The whole apartment was not bigger than 25 meters squared, which made the space look even more cluttered, an absolute mess. But at least it was her apartment, no strangers around invading her personal space. Rain stepped outside. A chill wind swept the busy streets. A dim winter sun embraced the downtown buildings. The constant noise of car horns, excited and/or drunk tourists, spoiled what would be a perfect cold day. She walked down the street to catch public transportation. The bus takes half the time. However, riding the bus meant interacting with the driver in order to pay the ticket, and Rain wouldn't have any of that. The subway it is. She stepped inside the subway station and into the corporate HQ. A huge screen outdoor marked Booker's building. A candidate with serious proposals, a realistic vision for our future, Booker for president. Booker's face, showing his typical confident smile, was seen on the outdoor screen. Going in, Rain had to identify herself, since she was not a regular employee. This proved to be an awkward hassle. The temporary employee card in her possession, depending on the security guy calling the shots that week, might be good enough or not. That interaction alone was enough to deplete Rain's social fuel. She approached the Booker's PM's office already tensed up. She expected a storm, yelling and overall unhelpful rage. "How did they get in? This is your job," Booker's PM shouted. "I'll have to do some forensics." Infrastructure auditing didn't reveal anything problematic. Rain tried to keep her composure, but it was difficult to disguise her anxiety and the slight shaking of her hands. "Find the hole. This is very serious. Are you listening? We're not paying you to sit at home and play on your computer. This is your responsibility." As annoying as the yelling was, she found that the despair of this man to get rid of all responsibility drove him to make some pretty bold claims that hurt her pride. There are many ways this could have happened, not necessarily an attack from outside that exploited your defense against threats that come from the internet, but something internal. An employee inserting an infected SD card or pen drive, for instance. The people working here are not idiots. I'm not implying that, but this sort of thing, they're all trained. There's a very strict policy against SD cards and pen drives on our machines, he interrupted. Sure, but it still can happen. People make these sorts of mistakes all the time. It seems to me that you're trying to weasel your way out of this. Not at all. Like I told you, I need to do some forensics before claiming anything. Then do it. Rain grabbed her laptop and started the investigation. After a while, she got a sample from the malware responsible for the attack. Okay, this is new. This malware targeted a specific software installed on the affected machines using an exploit that she hadn't seen before. This attack was elegant, smart, and efficient. She didn't understand the whole logic of the program, but the code took advantage of a specific feature on a printer within the network, allowing the attacker to insert some of his own code, thus giving him administrative privileges, a complete takeover. Jealousy built up in her eyes. She was a competent professional, but not extraordinary. To pull something like this, you need to be way ahead of the competition. Rain took the sample and ran home. The toxic corporate environment was already getting to her. She grabbed a cigarette and smoked outside the subway station, still shaking from being yelled at by Mr. Booker's project manager. It's not my fault, she told herself. Some idiot put an SD card in a computer. Happens every week. Even if they were compromised over the internet, she couldn't prevent every possible attack on every possible device on this huge network, right? She finished the cigarette and dashed home as fast as the barely functional subway allowed. This was one of these days where all your insecurities were poked. Chapter 4. Benjamin uploaded a new video simply titled, "So I'm Not Real." On this 20-minute rant, JB argued that this revelation wouldn't hinder his productivity. This channel is not going to die because of this. It's meaningless. My mission was not to present you a face or a body. It is to present and discuss ideas. This relentless witch hunt is an attack on free speech. Benjamin, despite being exposed as a ghost, was still using his ghost persona, a black-haired man using a long but well-kept graying beard. Rain didn't love JB or agree with everything he said, but found his rants amusing enough to warrant some late nights of binge-watching. And he was right. Who cares about his appearance? Maybe he just wanted to keep himself anonymous. Maybe he didn't want to deal with people like Mr. Booker bring him to court. Well, those sex tapes could be real. Who knows? In the good old days, if you didn't want to be identified on the internet, you used a ski mask or presented yourself as an animal avatar or something. This was basically the same thing, she thought. Now that she updated herself on the latest E-drama, she resumed work. The malware that she brought home was too much to chew. Time to bring a third party's help. While this was not technically allowed by her contract, she found it to be better than to do a lousy job. Mark was a beast at malware analysis, one of the top dogs on a huge multinational company and an old college friend. He was a valuable asset when extra input on ideas were needed. Rain sent him the sample and waited for his feedback. About 2 hours later, she got a text. "Hey, can you meet me in the coffee shop? I really don't like giving feedback over the internet, and this one looks like a piece of work." Understatement of the year, right? I'll be there in 20. The coffee shop was their usual go-to place to get stuff done. It had decent Wi-Fi, was quiet enough, and power sockets were always available. It was a chain coffee shop, which made Mark a bit uncomfortable. These places are exploitative and parasitic by nature, according to him. There were around 20 places of the same chain on the city, all with the same minimalistic Nordic-style decoration. It was sickening to him, but they were convenient and cheap. "So the bug on this computer, you said the malware was taking advantage of..." Mark paused and turned his laptop screen to Rain. "This is new. This piece of code in particular? This was what you were talking about, right?" He pointed at the piece of code that made Rain reconsider her competence. "Yeah, that's what made me realize that this was not a complete idiot going after low-hanging fruit." Rain turned her eyes away from the code and straight into Mark. "Wait, what do you mean by new? Is this a 0 day?" "Looks like it. A 0 day is the holy grail of a security professional. This means that the hacker who programmed this malware had the knowledge of a weak point in this specific software that no one else in the world had. This is huge. 0 days are rare. You're lucky to find a 0 day in a year working full-time. And to find one and use it on a real attack? This was not some kid in his mom's basement." "Wait, holy shit, who made this?" Rain asked. It was clear they were dealing with something on a whole other league. "That's not even the best part. What could possibly be better than a 0 day?" Mark looked straight at her with a smile. 3 of them. Chapter 5. Rain tuned in on her favorite podcast. She didn't want to deal with any work today. This malware situation was complete and utter bullshit. I do not deserve this. No one deserves this. You'd need to beat baby penguins with a club to deserve this. She grabbed a cigarette. The pack was drying up way too fast. I'm an average security person trying to pay rent, the bills, and not die. I don't want to be put against someone who pulls 3 0 days out of his ass. No, absolutely not. Today's guest on the podcast was a PhD on AI discussing the recent phenomenon concerning the use of ghosts on mainstream society. It's not only that we can fabricate people that mirror the image we want, he said in an excited tone. You can throw in the data set you want, and a person comes out. You can personify concepts. Concepts? Like love or hope, the podcast host asked, in a confused but curious tone. Make a data set with all of what people associate with love or hope, and we can turn it into a person. The next day was another drag. Rain had to do grocery shopping, which implied another trip to the outside world, and Mark insisted on another meeting to discuss the malware situation. Right outside the building was her neighbor from the apartment below. Miss Quinn was a 40-something typical woman, graying hair, mellow hazel eyes that do not lift from the screen of her smartphone. With the rise of AI-powered services, certain more out there services were offered. Imagine an AI capable of learning from all of the chats, all posts on social media from a certain person. If this person can accurately absorb language mannerisms, vocabulary, and opinions, it is possible to produce a sort of chatbot which replicates a person's presence online. One of the most unsettling applications of this principle is to manufacture a sort of online immortality. Certain moms have been found to be spending days talking with an AI copy of their dead sons. Since Quinn's son died in a car crash 1 year ago, this was basically her life. Imagine spending hours upon hours talking with a cold, unconscious pseudo-AI, Mark answered when Rain told him about Miss Quinn's new hobby. If it feels like their son, enough for them to spend so much time talking to it, I'd say it's impressive enough as a piece of tech, and who knows, maybe one day we can actually manufacture a truly alive chatbot out of a dead person's online presence, retorted Rain. Are you familiar with the Chinese room? I don't think so. It's a thought experiment. Imagine you're locked in a room with a bunch of Chinese characters and an instruction manual containing exact instructions of what to answer in Chinese, given a certain input, again in Chinese. So basically a stupidly large book containing if-then statements? Yeah, that's it. Now, you don't know a word of Chinese. However, if you receive a message from a native Chinese speaker, you are able, using this godly instruction book, to assemble an answer to any question in perfect Chinese. From the perspective of this messenger, outside of the room, you are a perfect Chinese speaker. But could you really say you know the language? Well, my first thought would be obviously not. And that's, in a nutshell, a rather convincing argument of why strong AI is impossible. You're giving a machine an extensive, precise instruction set on how to interpret a certain input and what output is acceptable. Even though it spits out convincing answers, you can't in good faith argue that the machine is conscious. Nevertheless, this hypothetical Chinese speaker is completely convincing. Absolutely. Then what difference does it make? On a surface level, however, we can confidently say a machine that transforms input A into output B using a sort of ultra-advanced formal grammar isn't alive. Aren't we basically that after all? According to certain stimuli, we exhibit certain behavior according to our program, which code is a combination of education and nature. It does seem a bit silly to argue what's truly human or conscious if we can't tell what makes us conscious or human. All right, we're hitting some impossible questions. We already have enough hardship on our hands with this piece of evil work. Mark returned his focus to the open text editor on his laptop. Right. So about those 0 days, should we report them for bug bounty money? Rain's dark eyes shined. Certain companies have bug bounty programs. These allow freelance hackers to report found security bugs on their products, usually for a monetary reward. Yeah, about that, I really don't like that idea. Why not? It's flawless. It's not like this mysterious hacker is going to tell on us. 3 0 days, Rain. 3 of them. All of them on devices that your client coincidentally just happened to own on his internal network. This is not a fat dude in his underwear posting screenshots of his attacks on the internet for street cred. What do you mean? This smells awfully like the work of a nation state, said Mark as he rubbed his eyes and pushed up his glasses. My advice would be to cover this up, tell Booker's people that someone opened an infected email attachment or something. What if they find out? My career would be over. If they had the ability to find this out by themselves, you wouldn't have been hired. Point taken. She was unsatisfied with this conclusion. Of course, she never dreamed of actually catching the perpetrator, but goddamn, just calling it quits by submitting a fake report and forget that she never saw this amazing malware didn't feel right. If she dug just a little bit deeper, maybe, just maybe, she could find evidence of who was behind this. But she lacked the skills to do this by herself, and Mark didn't want to get mixed up in this. Fuck it. Rain opened a bug bounty platform. The company that made one of the devices affected by the malware had a public bounty program. The prize money for a bug, similar to the one exploited by the 0 days, was $10,000. Fuck it. She submitted a report detailing how the 0 days worked and copy and pasted the snippet of code from the malware to the report, showing a proof of concept for this bug. She pressed submit. Fuck it. Chapter 6. A few weeks went by. Rain was a bit nervous. The bug report was an impulsive move, but she couldn't possibly contain that secret to herself. The following days were typical. The depressingly cold, gray, albeit cozy days continued, and Rain was, as usual, doing a mix of heavy procrastination and security auditing. After her third coffee mug and fourth cigarette, an email arrived on her inbox. Dear Miss Wynne, due to a contractual breach, Section 5, Article 6, we are terminating you from your contractual obligations, effective immediately. Best regards. The dry tone of the email didn't match Rain's mood at all. Her stomach sank. She fetched a copy of the contract and looked for the so-called Section 5, Article 6. She was barely able to go through the pages of the contract due to her shaking hands. Losing both the job at the campaign and the supermarket chain was not an immediate sentence to homelessness, but a contractual breach like this could seriously damage her career. Word travels fast in the world of information security. What was written on Section 5, Article 6 left her more puzzled and angry even than before. Article 6 states, under no circumstances should confidential information resulting of the security breach auditing leave the authorized devices or be presented to anyone not in possession of the required security clearance to handle such information. Rain had intense paranoia about handling information. Since most of this job relied on confidentiality, she exercised extreme caution about what data was on her possession and tried to keep everything required to be present on her devices encrypted. Given that, this termination was absolute nonsense. Then came a phone call. Booker PM showed up on the screen. I'm just confirming that you've received the email. We'll probably see each other in court. Wait, you're pressing charges? I haven't leaked anything. Where's the evidence? I'm emailing it to you. She opened the email's attachment. An audio file started to play. So you received the document I sent you. There is clear evidence that the CFO is going to resign soon. A voice that appeared to be Rain said. This is absolutely huge. For sure their stock prices are going to be hit, another voice said. The audio went on for a few more seconds, discussing this dramatic information. Rain was not impressed. Nice conversation with your reporter friend, said Booker's PM. This could be literally anyone, she said. Voice recognition matches it with yours, replied Booker's PM. Could be a ghost. I hired a specialized team. They found no evidence of such a thing. This is absolutely bogus. This evidence won't hold up in court. The leaked documents have your watermark. Rain froze. Her whole body shut down for a few seconds. Every employee had a personal card that granted access to doors, elevators, computers, and certain applications. When you logged into an internal application and downloaded anything, said application watermarked the documents. It was trivial to check who was responsible for the leakage unless he removed this watermark. Rain knew about this system. Everyone knew about this. However, this signature is mathematically impossible to forge. If a document had someone's watermark, it was almost certain that's who the copy came from. While the thesis that she leaked the information was absurd, given her knowledge of the system, this was foolproof evidence, legally speaking. Someone set her up. The person behind it, however, remained a mystery. Motherfucker. Chapter 7. She logged remotely into one of Booker's servers that she had previously hacked into. Rain, enraged, looked for evidence on the identity of the hacker. Not only was she now very much deep into criminal territory, this mysterious hacker most likely hadn't left a note with cut-out letters spelling a riddle, waiting a smart detective to find it and solve it. Nevertheless, she still looked into this far-fetched possibility. Once again, she stumbled on a bunch of incomprehensible code. Rain had no time to look into it. Actually, that was no longer her job, but this piece of weird code to be something left by the attacker before the data exfiltration. Machine learning. AI, all AI. But what was it learning to do? To find out, she dug the data feed into the machine. After scrambling through walls of code, she found the input to this giant neural network. It did not get any easier. Well, an all-nighter it is, she said. Rain grabbed her phone and ringed Mark. I really shouldn't get involved in your little psychotic episode, said Mark. But you really couldn't resist the draw of adventure, replied Rain. Mark was setting up his laptop on Rain's cramped desk, littered with receipts, books, and USB cables of every kind. He cracked an energy drink open and began to analyze the code. So basically, you think this was planted by the hacker, Mark said? I mean, I absolutely did not take part in that conversation, Rain said. You think the hacker somehow used an avant-garde voice replication technique to incriminate you and left the evidence right on his target's machine? Look, I don't know. It's just that it seems to fit the narrative and someone somehow produced an exact replica of my voice. A replica so good that even a specialist can't find marks of it being generated. Rain and Mark stayed in silence for a couple of hours, trying to reverse engineer the purpose of this learning algorithm, with only the sound of keys, clicks, and the occasional airplane in the background. I think I'm starting to get it. The data set is very far from being readable as it is, but look, Mark said. Mark isolated a few words from the huge data set. As a whole, it was not human readable, which was normal when it comes to this kind of thing. You can't just throw in the whole works of Shakespeare to an AI and expect the machine to become a legendary writer. The input has to be trimmed down to its essential, to the core of what it actually needs. Going from this core to the original format was not always a direct affair. In this case, Mark found words like hope, democracy, people. Is this like a speech? Rain said. Kind of, Mark said. Is this motherfucker using AI to generate speeches? I'm not entirely surprised if that's the case. I mean, it's clever, but wow, fuck. Rain threw herself into her tiny, badly maintained sofa. This doesn't solve your problem. There's no evidence of voice generation or anything like it, said Mark. There's already AI in there. Might be part of the same project. There was a ton of material in there. They scrolled through miles of code and destroyed 2 bags of store-brand chips until the pieces of the puzzle started to fall in place. Rain stood up, grabbed a cigarette and lighted it. The data being fed into the AI wasn't only speeches. They found something more human in there. Personality traits. Actions associated with certain personality traits. Data from Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, even Hitler. Cultural DNA fed this software. Data from all of the most successful and well-known leaders in history. You know I hate that, said Mark, waving a hand in protest to the smoke. You don't get it. It's not just the speeches, it's everything, said Rain. Everything? Asked Mark. It's a fucking ghost. Mark stood in silence and thought about her words. Rain was on her feet, cigarette in one hand, mouse on the other. She scrolled through the recovered data sets to make a point. It's all bullshit, said Rain. But you met the guy. Everyone has met the guy. He does public appearances regularly. How can he be a composite? There's a vessel for the ghost, I guess. Please elaborate, replied Mark. This is not just a speech generator. This is a politics generator. Speeches are just a component. This whole thing is generating a person. Like a ghost? Yes. They are generating the perfect politician. Yeah, you could say that. But Booker exists. He's a person. That's what I'm saying. He's a vessel. An actor? Something like that. Booker existed, but he didn't. His words, look, and even mannerisms were not his. Mr. Booker was the shell of the ghost, a way of the code to interact with the real world, a mere actor. His voters were trying to elect not a person, instead an idea. If this worked, democracy, much like tic-tac-toe, was a solved game. There is a precedence now, said Mark. Are we already being ruled over by AI over proxy? Rain sat down and rested her head on the palms of her hands, still processing what all this meant. How many people are actually ghosts? How many of my acquaintances are actors? Said Rain. When our parents and grandparents complained about fake people on social media, they were onto something, said Mark. All human interaction is now performance. What do we make of all this? We'll keep this under wraps, of course. Why, of course? Isn't it like a civic duty to expose this? For what purpose, replied Mark. He's giving them what people want. Why does it matter how he managed to figure out what they wanted in the first place? Mark was right. The cost-benefit relation to uncover all of this conspiracy was completely not worth the trouble. But why would this hacker try to incriminate you anyway? Asked Mark. I may have submitted a bug report with one of those 0 days, replied Rain. Dude, I clearly told you to... Fuck, never mind. Too exhausted to get mad, Mark tried to summarize the situation. Booker's strongest evidence that you were the person on the tape talking with the reporter is the smart card you guys used to log in, right? Right. You still have remote access to their systems. Is there any chance you can access the database with the smart card keys? Maybe you could... Oh, that's so illegal, Rain said. I mean, if that signature is changed, there's nothing you can do, right? Mark said. I don't like it, but I also don't like jail, replied Rain. Mark shut his laptop down and grabbed his jacket. Just keep me out of this. Chapter 8. Rain rolled on her bed and stared at her mobile phone's screen. Most of her social media feed was auto-generated clickbait articles written by AI. She received job offers received on a professional social network sent by non-existent human resources employees, and some of the actual existent humans online were merely performing an optimized character. Human interaction, life itself, was becoming theater. All of the ancient metaphors comparing life to theater and equating people with mere actors following a script were becoming literal. And all of this was fine. No moral panic concerning technology has ever produced anything of note. The end. Okay, thank you for joining us for that wonderful story, Believing in Ghosts. Here are our discussion questions. Number 1. The story talks about a Chinese room, a place with an enormous book of if-then statements that tell a non-Chinese speaker how to respond to every possible question asked to them in Chinese. In this hypothetical scenario, can it be said that the person speaks or knows Chinese? Does the exact approximation of Chinese speech make you a Chinese speaker or something else? Number 2. How are you as a person different than the Chinese room thought problem? Are you more than a series of if-then statements accumulated over time? Isn't your answer to the previous question exactly what an if-then statement book would tell you to say? Number 3. Does it matter if entertainment personalities are ghosts and not real people? How is a ghost actor in an action movie in the future any different than an animated character in an animated movie today? Does the fact that the ghost is so good it tricks you matter? Number 4. Would you feel comfortable having a ghost serve in other roles, such as a doctor, police officer, or teacher? If perfection and lack of bias is the point, shouldn't you want someone doing the job that never makes a mistake? Number 5. Are you okay with the ghost candidate in the story? Is the goal of a politician to be the perfect reflection of the desires of the people he or she represents? If so, what's wrong with programming that information and taking away the personal bias or corruptibility of a real person? That brings us to the end of our story, Believing in Ghosts. Thank you for joining us once again. Our story next week will be Monsters. If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussions of this and other short stories from our magazine. We'll include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage in the comments section and on our Facebook page. Thank you for joining us. Bye.